On episode 64, we're talking about colonizing Mars and what in the world that has to do with marketing. Hey everybody, what's up and welcome to the 88 Show. This is the internet's only dental show where we're answering marketing's most important questions because that is what we do here. This is episode number 64. And so we're moving right along, got some great episodes behind us. My name is Joshua Scott here on a Monday with the crew. Jay Moore behind the camera. Jay Moore, say what's up. There we go. And man, super fun episode today. We're gonna be talking about Mars and Mars colonization. And I know you're probably like, what in the world does that have to do with marketing? I'm gonna show you, because that's what we do, that's what we talk about. But no, it's gonna be fun. It's a really fun topic to talk about. And I need you to just kind of hang with me and follow me. But at some point, yeah, we're gonna take a right turn and specifically going to be talking about how this applies to dental startup practices. And maybe you're getting ready to launch a practice, maybe you have just launched one. I think you'll find some really relevant similarities here and some things that can help. Or maybe you're just getting ready to start a business. So I think you'll find some helpful things there as well. That's what we're gonna be doing this episode. Next week, episode 65, we'll look at some specific questions related to startup practices and startup businesses. And so hang in there with me for that. But let's talk about Mars. Because if you've kind of been in the news at all in the last year, I mean, outside of just the election taking over everything, there's been a lot of talk of Mars and these companies like SPACEX, who's led by Elon Musk from Tesla cars. It's his company, but just making some insane progress in the area of space technology. And so Elon kind of came out with this goal a few years ago of colonizing Mars with 1 million people. And before you kind of discount it and think it's crazy, he thinks we can do it. And not only is this just some goal that's out there, he's got a plan, okay? And so in his plan, he's got two major problems with colonizing Mars. I think there's probably millions of problems with colonizing Mars, right? But for simplicity's sake, we're just gonna like wrap it all up real neat into two problems. One of them is too expensive, and the other one is there's not enough power, okay? And so let's look at both of these real quick. So it's too expensive, number one. NASA came out with this kind of budget for Mars colonization and travel a while ago that said they could take 5 people to Mars for $50 billion, B-I-L-L-I-O-N, billion. And obviously at that type of budget, getting 1 million people to Mars and even talking about an inhabitable planet, man, forget about it. It's too far off. So SpaceX knew this. They had to get the cost down where it's affordable. And so what Elon Musk wants to do is get it to where it costs $500,000 a person to go to Mars. It's financed by private individuals who want to go, and that pays for the trip, okay? So that's the start. The other part of it is reusable rockets. You know, our space system is kind of, if you think about it, it's kind of this crazy technology where spacecraft launches, whether it's with a satellite or the space shuttle, and launches those things into space, and then those booster rockets fall back to Earth and burn up. And I mean, just to give you kind of some comparison, imagine traveling on an airplane and we could only get one use out of an airplane. You know, so it got you where you needed to go, but then it just burned up and we could never use it again. Air travel would become so expensive. And so that's what's happened with the space industry. And so SpaceX in 2015 set out to land these rockets again. And so they tried a few times. I mean, we'll put some video up, but it's all over YouTube, just unsuccessful. And the rockets would crash on these little platforms in the ocean. But at the end of 2016 or 2015 in December, they finally got their first one to land. And so they've created this repeatable pattern of launching a rocket, bringing it back down, landing it. And honestly, you watch the videos, like, it's cool, it's amazing. And so that's gonna get the cost down, okay? So that's problem number one. Problem number two is power. There's just not anything in our Earth, on our Earth right now, or that we've created that can power that type of spacecraft. And so, again, kind of went back to the drawing board, wiped out everything and said, we got to build our own engines. And so right now, SpaceX is building this engine. It's called the Raptor. And this thing is fierce. If you see video on YouTube showing, like demonstrating this, it can lift 310 tons of payload. Okay, and so I know that's a little bit hard to understand, but imagine 172 cars just stacked up. This thing can lift it up into space, okay? This Mars transporter they're gonna build has 46 Raptor engines on it. So it's going to be a crazy spacecraft that can carry anything up into space. So that, now, when this thing launches, it's going to use all of its fuel. So they have a system of refueling in orbit. So that's the other part of the power issue is you use all the power getting up, you put the thing in orbit, refuel, send another rocket up, and then that fuel is going to power them to get to Mars. And then once they're there, now they've got to manufacture more fuel on Mars to even get back. And so you can see it kind of just gets complicated. It's not just about power getting there, but it's about refueling at different stages. And so if they want to get back home, they've got to make their own fuel, which SpaceX thinks is probably going to be the easiest part because Mars is full of CO2 and water, which can make methane, which is what powers these rockets. And so, look, I realize this is a very simplified, overly simplified version of this. There are very smart, intelligent people online, scientists and engineers talking about this in very, scientific, intelligent ways. That's not here today. This is just kind of putting it out there. I think it's definitely worth researching this topic. It's a ton of fun. But SpaceX, their timeline, January of 2025. They are projecting launching the first people to Mars. And so January 2025, I mean, that's like 8-9 years from now. To be clear, pretty much all of us watching this video and in this room will see the Neil Armstrong of Mars. And I think that's pretty crazy. So let's talk about what that has to do with marketing. All right, so let's talk about, because I realize that's a really big kind of right turn, right? We're gonna talk about Mars and what in the world does that have to do with marketing? And specifically, we're gonna talk about startup dental practices. And whether you're in the dental industry and maybe you're a year or 2 or 3 into a startup, or you're thinking about it, or man, even if you're just starting a business that's kind of in the back of your head, or again, you're kind of in the early stages of it, I think there's some really helpful things here. And number one is that it takes a visionary to see something different. And so, it took somebody like Elon Musk to kind of go, we need to do this. There needs to be something different. Space travel, back when it first began, with John F. Kennedy and putting a man on the moon, it was almost like this, it peaked with interest in American society and it almost just declined and fell flat. And so we look at that, it was gonna take a visionary to come around and say, why has this not progressed? Why are we not making more advancement into space? And so number one is it starts with a visionary who sees something different. Number two is it takes years of planning. It takes years of planning. This is a story of a company that has, and a person who has incredible foresight to be able to look down the road and plan and project advancements and technology breakthroughs and all those things. And so if you've started a dental practice, it wasn't just something where you launched out or whether you started a business and just one day woke up and said, I'm gonna try this, I'm gonna start a business. There's probably been years of planning behind that. Some days maybe not even thinking that it was actually happen. Maybe, at points thinking, man, I just need to scrap the whole thing and start over. Maybe looking at all you had available and realizing you don't even have the tools that you need to make it happen. And so you'll have to back up to build the tools that you need. And so all that just takes planning. It takes a massive amount of time. And it's just not something that you walk into overnight on a whim, spontaneously, and do. So that's number two. It takes a long time planning. And so number three is it takes a lot of energy to launch. We saw this with the colonization of Mars. Like they're literally building rockets right now to just get that payload into space, that have enough power to launch that. And I think this is a really great point when it comes to startups, because it just takes a lot of energy to launch. Probably one of the most common conversations I have with our startup practices that we work with is just getting into it and the amount of energy that it takes to get to that point where it's almost like now you've got to orbit, and now it's like, okay, breathe. And usually that's probably somewhere around year 3. It could be middle year 2, it could be year 4, but somewhere in that span is like you've launched, and we now kind of get to this point where it's like, okay, we made it. Like, we're not gonna die, right? But it took an immense amount of energy to get to that point. And so that's number 3. It takes a ton of energy to launch. This goes hand in hand with point number 4, which is they have to refuel in orbit. So you gotta have a moment where you refuel. And I think the point here is when we're talking about startups and we're talking about businesses launching, yes, it takes a enormous amount of energy, but that also means you have to have places where you stop and refuel. And so Mars colonization, enough power to get them into orbit, and then they got to kind of hang out and get another rocket to come up and refuel them to continue the journey. And so I think it's almost like separating these phases, of there's the launch phase, and then there's the like growing the business phase, or the next phase, almost like the dream. We all have this dream of launching a practice or launching a business. And so that dream is not the short-term launch. That dream is like the long-term goal. And that could be 10 years, 20 years, 40 years, the next 60 years. And so what we have to do is kind of chunk out, like pull out, segment out that launch and go, this launch is gonna take a ton of energy. The rest of it, we can't expend that type of energy for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years. It's just not gonna happen. Like, we'll burn out, you won't get to your destination. So what you have to do is have a moment after the launch, and whether that's like something really specific and intentional where you slow down and go, let's refuel, or whether you just have moments, or whether it's just kind of a downshift in pace, but having a time where you go, okay, we launched, took a ton of energy. In order for us to get there the next 10, 20 years, we've got to have refueling points along the way. And whatever those look like, stopping to celebrate, continuing education, inspirational stuff, whether that's just even things in your lifestyle. It could just be you haven't worked out for 3 years because you've been launching a business. And I get that. But now it's time to make some of those adjustments, refuel, put back into yourself and your team, because you got the next 40 years of this thing to get there, okay? So that's number 4. And then last is the mission is service. The mission is service. One thing I know is that when SPACEX launches their first Mars transport with people on it, it will be under the banner of serving humanity. This is going to be a humanitarian mission. It's going to look really cool on the tech side and the exploration side and all that, but the goal behind here is serving humanity. And whether you've started a business because you wanted to fill a need that you saw was there, or you started a dental practice, the goal was service. It was serving humanity. And sometimes in this whole kind of launch and mission, that can get on the back burner, it can get pushed to the side. And so just reminding yourself of the fact that we're doing this to serve people. We're doing this because we care about people. We're doing this because I saw a different model. I saw a different way of people being treated. I saw a different way of people being cared for. And I think that type of mission, keeping that front and center, will help guide you in that process. It'll help navigate that whole journey, no matter how crazy it gets, no matter if you're in this intense launch phase, no matter if you've stopped to refuel, no matter if you've got the next 3 months, you're just hanging out on your way to Mars. Having that in front of you is like your guide. It's your North Star. And so it'll help you navigate. All right, guys, that wraps up episode 64. Look, thanks so much for being here. Always appreciate it. Appreciate the feedback you give me online or in person if I see you. That wraps up this episode of Mars. So question of the show, I think it's pretty obvious. Would you go to Mars? Would you go to Mars? I'm like, I probably would, but I've got a wife and kids too, so that complicates things for sure. But would you go to Mars? Yes or no? I'll give you the $500,000 if I had it. We'll pretend you don't need it, but would you go? I think it'd be a blast. Would love to hear your thoughts on that. Also, next week, episode 65, we're going to talk about specific questions for startups. So that's happening. If you want to follow me, best place is on Instagram. JMO is going to stick that right down here. Would love to connect with you there. Guys, I think that's it. Thanks so much for being here. I'll see you on the next episode.